Welcome to Silicon Valley Asian Business Talk.
Hello, everyone. This is Roger Chen from Center for Business Studies and Innovation in Asia Pacific, University of San Francisco. Vera, I want to welcome you to our interview program. And would you please briefly introduce yourself?
Thank you, Roger. It's a real pleasure to join you on this podcast. My name is Veera. I'm from Sustainable Living Lab. We're a group of companies that basically deliver services around sustainability, consulting, and also all the adjacent sort of activities in that space. We've been around as a business for 14 years. We started out headquartered in Singapore. Today, we have offices in Indonesia, India, and the US, and we operate in about 30 countries. We have a staff strength of about 80 people delivering services in this space.
Building business based on sustainability missions.
When you established yourself, maybe you can share with us your early process, early journey of finding or searching for your first kind of a initial product or services, even though it is in the sustainability field, and it would typically call it a product market fit type of a service. Would you please kind of elaborate your journey of searching for your first service?
Yeah, sure. So certainly, I mean, one thing we were quite clear. So I was a group of three co-founders, and something that me and my co-founders were quite clear is that we wanted to work on a problem that was enduring, right? And sustainability at a point in time, and what we studied about it indicated there was an enduring problem that will continue to grow. The second thing was we wanted it to make sure it aligned or intersected with our studies in engineering, right? So we wanted to be basically doing something that combined sustainability and engineering together. Now, as you know, 14 years ago, sustainability is a very ill-defined industry. In many ways, it still is, right? But it was very ill-defined then. And so we sort of started with the basis of let's develop some kinds of products, right? And so that led us into the development of humanitarian engineering products. So products that are used in a humanitarian aid sort of setting or situation. Then we looked into basically upcycling of waste materials into products such as sound amplifiers and corporate gifts and so on. And in the process of doing that, we actually ended up setting up a makerspace to facilitate our innovation and prototyping and development work. Now, to our great irony, our clients weren't very much interested in the humanitarian engineering products, nor were they interested in the upcycle stuff. What they were more interested in was the fact that we had set up a makerspace, and they saw it as a way to develop an innovation culture. Now, as you remember, at this point in time, the idea of setting up a makerspace and using it to drive innovation culture in companies, in schools, in institutions was really, on the rise. This was the days of tech shop, if you remember, in the Bay Area. So we were also caught up in a wave, and we sort of pivoted. But instead of the direction that the makerspaces took in the US, which is to focus on personal creative projects, we basically decided to take the idea of having makerspaces to develop projects for sustainable innovation.
Mhm.
That was the direction that we took because that helped us both tap on what was a growing demand and also aligned it with our own interest. And of course, over time, that too evolved. We went into developing sustainable innovation programs, and from programs, eventually, we led us into consulting, right? And that's kind of where we operate today.
That is very interesting. So that's very interesting kind of a pivot, starting from certain service or products, then you find that the clients are interested in the byproduct or are you saying the make space, right? Like people can just experiment some ideas, prototypes, then you start from that discovery and to offer and kind of realign to your original vision, right?
Exactly. I mean, the whole idea is that the beauty, I would say, of starting your own business ultimately is that you want to do something that you love and enjoy, right? I mean, you got to be working on something that you love and enjoy. At the same time, you got to make sure that the market is also able to accept and value it effectively, right? So that you can also get remunerated. So the ability to combine what you love with what the world needs, I think that's where the magic happens. And it took us a while
Great.
to get there. I mean, product market fit took us nearly, I would say, 2.5 years before we got to a point saying that, you know what, I think this is going to work for now. But even then, it wasn't over, right? I mean, the market moves, the market shifts, and then you have to shift along with it. I mean, we have seen at least three pivots in our
Hmm.
14-year history, right? So I think you always got to keep an eye out.
Okay, great. Actually, could you kind of briefly comment on your major pivots? As you say, you have three major pivots. What are the lessons? What are the kind of stories behind it?
So the first major pivot was basically the makerspace stuff, which I explained about. The second pivot was basically going into programs, right? So we got to a point where we had developed the first makerspace in Singapore, the first makerspace in Indonesia, the first one in Cambodia and Philippines, and at our peak, we were running 28 makerspaces in the Southeast Asian region, right? What happened is that we inadvertently ended up saturating the market. So,
Hmm.
and we found that new clients had so many examples of makerspaces to study and learn from, they did not need our consulting services anymore, right?
Hmm.
They could simply poach talent from existing makerspaces and set up new ones, right? So we found that we became so successful, we eroded our own competitive advantage in this space. And so we had to pivot, right? So we pivoted, we said, look, now there's about over 150 makerspaces in Southeast Asia, all right? What are they missing? What are they lacking? They're lacking the programs layer that sits on top of the makerspace because they have a
Hmm.
beautiful, spanking, expensive, millions of dollars space and it's empty. It's not being utilized. You're having white elephant equipment over there, right? So, what kind of programs to activate the space? Right? So we looked into that, and so we shifted from maker spaces into maker programs, programs that spur innovation, but do it through a hardware prototyping innovation sort of model. Again, centered on sustainable development goals and sustainability targets. Um, that was our second major pivot. The third major pivot, I would say, is actually a combination of something that we missed out on and also a development that happened, which is COVID, right? So if you remember in the 2017, 2018 period, data science was a huge wave of data science, right? Now
Yes.
we completely missed that wave in the organization, right? We completely missed that wave, and we were sort of, really, upset with ourselves for missing the wave and not evolving with it. And
Hmm.
so we decided to get involved into what we felt was the next evolution of data science, which was AI in 2018. Just
Oh.
before AI was a major sort of area of interest, right? Um, and then, of course, we did a couple of projects, and then COVID happened, right? And so when
Hmm.
COVID happened, all the physical makerspaces and the physical makerspace oriented programs, prototyping, and stuff shut down completely, right? All over the
Hmm.
world, all over the world shut down, right?
Yeah.
But what really picked up in its place was AI. Right? AI really picked up, and because we managed to plant ourselves in that space, we ended up working with our clients to develop and scale up massively, right? Um, our AI programs, and in fact, that was a time where we actually saw international expansion in a big way because while we were started off in Singapore and we had done some work in the region, our clients were international MNCs, right? And we had to be wherever they were. So if they were in Costa Rica, we had to be there. If they were in France, we had to be there, right? And that major pivot was how do we reorganize the company in order to grow with the customer, right?
Hmm.
And not just think small, right? As a
Yeah.
small company, but rather grow with the customer and sort of leverage their connections and expertise and learnings and sort of, grow alongside them and also grow adjacent to them. I think this was
Hmm.
another major sort of, I wouldn't call it a pivot so much as it was a restructure of the way the organization worked in itself and the kind of people that we had. And why it was such a major restructure was that it was so radical that we lost half our team,
Oh.
right? Because remember, this was the COVID period. There's also the great resignation happening as well. And then we had this major pivot, and people were like, look, stuff is already so crazy out there. And now you're changing all these things. I'm not sure I want to be in the team. Right? And so
Hmm.
so we lost half our team. And we basically had to kind of build it up again from scratch. So we were a 30-person team or so at a time, right? And we built it up, and today now we're an 80 plus person team. But that was a lot of restructuring and learning, and really reviewing every single action that we had taken to that point.
Fascinating. A quick question, follow-up question. Why you decide, you said you missed the data analytics wave. Why you decide to bet on the AI, which, during 2018 was still very early? What's the reason behind that bet?
Yeah. So basically, the way I look at bets is that, so I'm a firm believer in strategic foresight or futures thinking. It was
Mm,
a area or field of study that was introduced to very early on, and I think you sound like you're familiar with it as well. But it involves the study of driving forces and signals, and figuring out what are the possible pathways the future can take, and aligning yourself that regardless of whichever future comes to fruition, you are still in an advantageous position, right? So what we definitely saw is that all the signals that we see now, right? Singapore had an explosion in data centers. So Singapore is a big hub for data centers, and there was an explosion, absolute explosion of it. And it got us to ask why, right? Why is Amazon, Facebook, Meta, all these guys setting up data centers in Singapore?
mm,
We really expect the data, availability to increase by so much. And what does that actually mean in the context of computing and so on, right? Then on the other hand, you saw there was a big wave around machine learning, right? So before ChatGPT and so on, machine learning was a big breakthrough, right?
yeah, yeah.
Idea that you could, on large amounts of data, train the models, right? And so you didn't have to do a rule-based system. You could do a machine learning model instead, right? But for that, you need to crunch a lot of data, and so you need huge data centers. So we saw the fact that bigger companies than ours have made multi-billion-dollar bets on this. We kind of felt that they couldn't be too wrong, right? They've already put billions of dollars on line for this, right? And
Yeah.
said, it is not as risky for us to make similar bets because so many others have made much bigger bets than us on this, right? So I think from a risk standpoint, we sort of saw other people moving in the direction, much bigger players, and we said, look, okay, this is a huge area. What is a niche we can find in the
Mm,
AI space, right? And let's tackle that niche. So the niche that we selected, of course, was basically the trading space, right? The trading of AI talent, because everyone was interested in building the AI products, at least the big companies were, but no one was talking about where would the talents come from, right?
mm.
Who is going to supply the labor and knowledge, right? I mean, to actually make use of these products and services and solutions. So that's the niche we decided to focus on.
We focus on a few customers, offer diverse services.
It's very clear, actually. I look at your company's background and your growth journey, growth process was very, very impressive, kind of engaged also in different kind of programs, right? And so could you, my first question is, could you kind of very briefly, just share with us the very rough sequence of your different services that you add on as your company grow? Then I have other growth related questions. So what are the rough sequence of adding different products and services to your portfolio?
Sure. So, like I said, the starting was the maker spaces, these physical
Mm-hmm.
spaces. We looked at maker programs. So, essentially, when you're a maker space, you can activate a lot of different things, right? You could
Mm,
essentially be looking at, I want to support entrepreneurship and startup development, especially hardware startup development. You could
mm.
say that, I want to basically offer prototyping services, actual laser cutting, 3D printing, machining services. We
Oh.
also basically looked at repair. In fact, repair is one of those really, really interesting programs for us. Is that um, what started out originally as a way to bring together community to tackle the idea of electronic waste in Singapore over the
Yeah.
last 10 years has led into what is possibly in Singapore the most effective active aging program for male seniors, right? So
Oh.
in Singapore, we have an aging population, right? And I'm sorry to digress a little bit, right? Because it brings home the story about why we need to keep an eye out for opportunity, right? So we did a repair program originally conceived to tackle the e-waste problem. Because we are looking at sustainability, we look at e-waste, and it was massive e-waste problem in Singapore. Like all affluent societies, people change their phones every 2 years, right? The landfills are
Yeah.
just filling up, right? And there's so much waste out there, and to us it felt that was terrible. We gotta do something about it, right? And the repair industry in Singapore, like in many affluent countries, had collapsed because the cost of labor was incredibly high.
Yes. Yes.
So we said, okay. And unlike the US, we did not have a latent DIY culture, right? In Southeast Asia, at least, right? So the challenge was that, okay, let's try to figure out how we can get the skills and the tools in the hands of people so that they can repair their own devices. So it was a very noble, CSR-ish type of, non-profit endeavor. That was how it started, right? Now, what we realized is that people showing up for these things tended to be above 60 years old. And
Hmm.
majority of them were elderly seniors and were senior males. And that's kind of weird, right? Why all these people showing up every single time? We're not getting, and we struggled. In fact, we said, we need more young people, and we really tried very hard to get young people, but young people were not interested at all. It was only seniors who were interested. They were like, and we decided to lean into it. So we said, okay, you know what? Let's not fight the wave. Let's lean into it. If seniors are just showing up without us even trying, there'll be something here that works for seniors, right?
Yeah.
So we, with the same program, we said, you know what? Let's try and understand this active aging space, senior space, and see, how we can sort of modify our program to make it suitable for this audience, right?
Yeah.
So the repair programs became our flagship active aging approach. And in fact, today, we work very closely with the Ministry of Health and associated healthcare institutions in Singapore to figure out, how do we get elderly, and especially males, to be active and feel a sense of utility in society so that you can, stave off problems like dementia, social isolation,
Yeah.
and all
Yeah.
these kind
Yeah.
of longer healthcare issues. Because in Singapore, we have sort of a socialized healthcare system, unlike the US. So which means that many elderly sick people means that the tax burden becomes especially high for the government, right? So
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
great desire to try and reduce that sort of a long-term healthcare burden, right? And so they're trying to do preventive actions, right? And so active aging is seen as a very preventive sort of step. And so 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 that sort of pivot or diversification happened at a point in time, but we only really saw, I would say, the active aging component of it about 3 to 4 years after running the repair programs, right? So we had the makerspace, we ran repair programs, we ran entrepreneurship programs, right? We also ran programs on teaching youth and adults skills, especially technical skills like how do you program an Arduino, how do you do coding and stuff like that. I think each of these things evolved and took its own direction, right? And when a particular project or a particular initiative takes a life of its own, then in our model, we spin it off as a separate company, right?
Oh, okay.
And the reason we spin it off as a separate company is because, look, as a small and medium enterprise, we are not the most attractive employer from a long-term career prospect, right? People will stay
Mm.
for 2 to 3 years and then they will leave. The best I could offer to my senior team members is that you can be a CEO of your own company,
Yeah.
a company that's part of our group instead, right? So that's the best I could offer, right? So
That's
in
great.
a way,
Actually, I
yeah,
will
yeah,
I will have a follow-up question. I do have a separate question about, I think you mentioned about this called the venture studio model. I'm very
mm-hmm,
interested in that later on. Yes.
yeah. So the idea of setting up, you know, each pivot, and when a pivot is successful and gains a life of its own, then we would, basically appoint one of our senior team members to be the CEO to lead it and grow that particular company. Of course, drawing upon the experience and the networks and connections of the parent organization, right? So we pivoted into repair. We did pivot into artificial intelligence, like I shared. We did pivots into cybersecurity, which we call digital trust. We also did pivots into semiconductor design as well, right?
Mm.
And this is very interesting, right? Because as US and China are currently having a trade war, or at least they don't call it a trade war, some kind of a trade friction, right? And
Yeah.
a lot of it is centered around semiconductors. But what is happening is that all the other countries watching this show, the sidelines, are thinking a particular thing. They are thinking that, oh my gosh, if for some reason someday if I either upset the US or I upset China, I might get locked out of semicon chips completely. So maybe I need to develop my own latent capacity to manufacture these things in the country. right? So they see from a national security perspective right now, right? And so, we got involved in this space because, a lot of them are asking us, say, hey, you guys are working with all these, manufacturing semicon companies, right? Have you guys ever thought about potentially, offering some kind of skilling education in a very critical national security need, right? And so when we found that there was enough traction in the space, you know what, that sounds pretty cool. Maybe it's time we set something up, specifically look at that, right? So for that particular one, we're still in the process of setting up something separately. But I'm sharing with you like how we sort of think about new opportunities and when we decide to make the shift to say that it's time to set up a new company. Right?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense actually. See, one word comes into my mind is, or phrase comes into my mind is like opportunities breed opportunities, like one lead to the other. That's great. So
Yeah,
thank you.
exactly. Yeah.
Actually, that's fascinating. I maybe relating to your kind of early information about the journey of expansion. Could you kind of share your wisdom and experience of, balancing between specialization and a diversification because you're doing a lot of things. Do you face the challenges of this kind of a tension between specialize something versus branch out to do lots of very different things? If the challenge is there, how do you balance the two actually?
Right. So the way I tell my team is this, right? We specialize not in the product, we specialize in the customer.
Mm. What do
So
you mean by
so
that? Mm.
for example, when we work with a particular customer, we kind of try to figure out all the different pain points that they have and be able to be in a position to offer solutions to them. So we work with a lot of government customers, right? The government partners, and we have a good idea of the kind of issues that a ministry or a government will face, right? And so we're able to say that we need to continue to be a very useful service provider and a partner to our clients. And so let's try and solve and firstly just try to understand the problems that they have, and either find partners or try to solve them directly ourselves, right? So we aim to be specialists in the problem space, not necessarily in the product, right? Because the product and the solutions can always change, but the
Mm.
customer doesn't change, right? The customer is still there, the customer's needs evolve, and solutions that used to work last year may not work 3 years from now, right? So when we talk about specialization over here, we really try to be specialized in the customer and the customer group and category and type,
Okay.
and we try to deepen that instead.
How to expand services for the same customers.
In many B2B situations, when you try to, even with the same customer, same client, sometimes the different problems comes from different stakeholders in the company, comes from different departments. Sometimes these kind of a different department stakeholders, there's a huge disconnection to kind of make it difficult for you to kind of change to a new solution for the customer or for the same client. How do you solve that problem?
Yeah, so this is quite typical, right? So one of the things usually is that most MNC customers, right, they're actually, if you think about an MNC, it's actually many small companies working together, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Effectively, it almost feels that way, right? So the way we think about it is that we too, when we engage with, let's say, a different department of the customer, we may not engage them through the company who was engaging the previous part of the customer, right? So we'll engage them through a different entity, a different company itself. So that way, there's certain compartmentalization as well, and also ability to focus on that specific department or that specific, a business unit and their needs as well. And this is where I think our structure of having, spin outs and all that helps a lot, because we're able to, as a group, have different of our entities work together with the same customer, coming at it from different angles, working at it from different angles, right? And it allows us to build expertise as well, because once you spin out and have different venture, you say that, okay, I want you guys to focus on doing, a particular type of, sub client. So let's say, for example, you look at the sales and marketing team, for example, right? Say, I want you guys to specialize in working with a sales and marketing team. I want you guys to specialize in working with a sustainability team, right? And you understand the kind of functional roles that particular department may have with in the large organization. And so we try to serve that. So as you can imagine, this gets pretty complicated pretty fast, right? So fortunately for us, right, like I don't think we're at a stage where we have hundreds of customers to the point that it's getting very clunky, right? At this stage, we probably have like about 20, 30 customers, but big customers in which we work at different levels with them. Uh, but I suppose when it gets to a point where it gets too clunky, then we may have to make another pivot, right? It's going to be a hard choice for us to really figure out whether this model that we have continues to work or whether we have to streamline or reformulate ourselves in some fashion. Right? I think these
Mm.
are questions that we got to keep an eye out for. And when we see the problems begin to emerge, then I think it's time to really sit down and review.
Okay, so that's great. Actually, a quick follow-up question: how are you able to engage multiple departments of a same client? Any kind of lessons or advice here? Because I think every company hear your story, love that model. But how do you engage with these different departments, different stakeholders within the same large client or even government?
Yeah. So basically, let's say a government, for example, right? So a lot of these things basically work. So from a MNC or a government perspective, or rather a large customer perspective, they are not necessarily optimizing for value when it comes to a
Mm,
solution. They're optimizing first and foremost for trust, right?
What do you
Can
mean by
I
that?
tr- can I trust you not to mess it up and
Oh,
put my job or my promotion or my career on the line,
yeah,
right? Can I trust you not to screw up, right? So the first order of business is that I must trust that even if your solution may not be the best and most perfect solution, it mustn't put me at risk, right? You got
yeah,
to optimize for trust, right? First of all, right? And then once you cross the layer, then it gets to, is your solution good enough? Good enough to meet their needs, good enough to meet their requirements. And I would say the third thing is that your solution needs to be able to grow with the customer as well, right? You can't just, have what you did and then keep it static, right? And have them expect them to pay for it year after year, right? You need to be able to deepen your understanding, evolve with it, and get better and move closer and closer towards perfection in trying to tackle that particular problem that they have. And in many of these companies, what you find is that uh, team members or even in government departments, people move around, right? So when you work on a relationship-based model, what happens is that when they move to a different ministry or department and so on, they bring you along with them, and that's assuming that you have developed a what I call a advisor relationship with the customer. Where a lot of companies look at it and say, I just want to be a vendor and you're a vendor relationship, and it's a very transactional relationship, and that's not great, right? Because what that means is that you're just seen as somebody, who would do a piece of service for which you will pay for, but you don't get to craft the specifications of the service in the first place, or you don't get to influence whether the service is needed in the first place, right? So we like to be in a position where we aim to be advisors to our clients rather than vendors. Because once you're an advisor, I think your ability or space to maneuver is so much larger.
Mistakes took you as long time to realize/fixing growth.
Do you think you made any mistakes along this expansion journey? And if so, actually, what are the wisdom, the lessons?
Oh,
Because I
plenty
think
of mistakes,
your
yeah.
company had a fascinating growth story because it's kind of you are doing lots of very different things and using a very unique model, which I will, kind of ask you to explain. But, along the way, do you think you made mistakes or wisdoms actually to share?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think one of the things is that, so we are a bootstrap company, right? We've never raised any funding or investment and whatnot, right? But
Mm,
we always, have the allure, right, of like, oh, should we go and get investment? How nice it will be, whatever, and so on. And I think we wasted a lot of time chasing that kind of money, which, in hindsight, it was a total waste of time, right? We should have done that, right? We should have focused on what we are doing, which is to make sure that we are delivering valuable solutions to our clients, right? I think we should have focused double down on that. I think there's a lot of wasted time that we spent the effort.
Oh, wait,
The
wait a
second
minute,
thing,
actually, Vera.
yeah,
I just try to clarify. You say you think you waste time, efforts on what?
on basically trying to chase for investment money
Oh,
for
huh.
external investors and so on, right? Because fundamentally, the kind of business that we're running is not set out or is not typical what they call typically a VC based sort of setup, right? What we don't offer the 10, 1500x kind of growth, right? We're a profitable company. We have very consistent 10, 15, 20% growth. By all reasonable means, right? We are a fairly decent growing company, but we are not your unicorns. We're not. We're probably never going to be there, right? And I think the ability to accept that and to double down on who we are and be very comfortable in that skin was something that took a long time for us to get around to. Right? There were always feelings of like, should we be doing this or that and whatnot, right? And the management team, and myself, we wasted a lot of time, right, in trying to chase vanity metrics and so on, when we should have been focusing on the business, right?
Actually, that's very good. There's a lot of attractions, but these attractions are like distractions in a sense, right? And instead, kind of okay, that's really kind of fascinating. And I like your idea. You have to go back to your roots and focus on the product service, especially admit, the key is admit that your model is not naturally fit for VC, although VC is very flashy, attractive, trendy kind of stuff, right? Thank you.
Using holding company/venture studio model to grow.
You mentioned about you are using the venture studio model, spin out the company. Could you elaborate this model, why you do this, how you do this? These are very interesting questions for a lot of people to learn from you.
Right. So I think the way we think about this is that first and foremost, for any kind of business that we do, we need to establish, right, if we start a new business. One thing we've realized in starting a new business that it takes about 3 years before a new business becomes stable, right? And we've arrived at this 2 to 3 years sort of window before a business becomes stable, right? So we looked at what actually happens in a 2 to 3 year window, right? What actually really happens, right? So what really happens is that in typical terms, you will initially find there's a particular kind of solution that you may have developed for a particular client, which may have worked successfully. And you find that you get maybe 2 or 3 more clients who seem to be interested in very similar sort of things, right? And you say, maybe what we did could be made a bit broader and made suitable for a category of customers and not just being very, very specific to a single customer, right? And so you look at how do you abstract that particular solution, right? And now once you abstracted it, what it means is that you got to figure out whether you have some kind of traction, right? And what traction means is that for the abstracted solution, are you able to find, 5 to 10 customers, right, that are willing to pay at a particular rate, which is profitable and allows us to justify expansion of their business into its own independent unit, right? And when we get to the point, which will take about 2 years, right? We get to the point, we said, okay, it's time to set up a separate company, right, specializing in these new category of solutions and so on, right? And now the thing is that it is not a case of setting up the business and asking them to go do it on their own, because the whole beauty of this and the power and the strength of this is that they must be able to tap on the networks, capabilities, and the expertise of the parent and group companies. Because if what they are doing means that they're only working alone, then there is no benefit, right? It's just like setting up a new company from scratch.
Yeah.
Right? You're not going to leverage anything, right? So we got to set it up such that there are sort of human links between the management of the new company and the management of the other companies. We got to make sure that they all know each other. They meet and discuss regularly. So there's a sort of a meeting of minds at the operational management level across the different companies, right? So I would say a lot of human systems, or social systems need to be set up in order to facilitate that sort of culture, right? Where we see it as bringing the group forward. And, we have a lot of opportunity for cross-selling as well, right? So, when you're going to talk to the customer something else, you find that, hey, maybe another company in my group could benefit from it. So we have to also create incentive structures so that if company A basically generates a business lead for company B in the group, then there is a certain share of the profit, right? It basically accrues back to company A for doing that cross-selling activity, right? So people are incentivized, right, in fact, to do cross-selling. And also there is the culture that we create where the management teams are familiar with each other and develop their own relationships and friendships as well, right? Which basically engenders collaboration and trust. So I would say that the venture studio model, the magic of it really is in the social systems that you have to set up, right, for it to work, rather than the business model itself. Because this model itself is essentially a sort of a startup accelerator type thing, right? Nothing too special or fantastic about it. But the fact is that it's all tied to a group, and you're essentially part of a club, and you're not going it alone, and you get both financial support, client support, right, and a lot of other sort of support from the group that enables you to be successful much more easily compared to doing it alone.
That's
And
interesting.
which is why our team members we promote into these CEO roles, we can always ask the question, right? Why don't they set up their own companies on their own? They say no, it's so much easier to be part of the venture studio model, right? It's so much
Mm.
easier because you are set up for success.
Yeah.
And they very much prefer that compared to taking the risk of doing something totally on their own.
Right. So the question is actually for when you spin out, but legally and equity-wise, they are independent company, right?
So the group may hold or usually holds a certain percentage of shares in
Mm.
the spin-out. Right now, it
Mm.
may be a minority shareholder, it may be a majority shareholder. Usually, the model is that we are vesting schedule, right? So that over time, the parent company reduces its holdings
Mm.
in the spin-off, and that the CEO or the founding management team of that spin-off company, as they do better, they get a bigger and bigger share of the company. So there's incentive for them to really grow the business, right? Because they're going to benefit and partake in the growth story. So
Mm.
you're really going to align incentives over here. I mean, end of the day, it really comes down to that, right? I mean, yes, we work in the sustainability space. We kind of work in the impact space. That is true, but people are incentivized, financially as well. They're incentivized in terms of the kind of ownership that they have, and I think all these things come to play.
Actually, it's a related question. So maybe it's kind of backward question. Why not just like a mini US companies? You still put them inside the same company, except that particular unit or BU, you may call that, is getting bigger and bigger. Why that model, with like a bigger company, bigger BU model, does not fit with your situation? It's better
Yep.
for you to spin them out to make us like an
Mm.
independent company. There's an equity share relationship with them.
Yeah. So the reason for this, I think is because of our interactions with our larger customers, right, and seeing how they operate. So a lot of the larger MNCs that we work with tend to operate, as you said, in that BU fashion, and we can see the problems with that, right? We can see the problems in terms of the silos. We can see the problems in terms
Hmm.
of the kind of adverse competition they have within themselves, the politicking, right? I think we see all these things, right, and we are like, there's got to be a better way. Sometimes we think to ourselves, aren't they the same company? Like, why are they behaving in this way, right? They are all part of the same team, right? So it boggles our mind, right? Like why does corporate behave in that way, right? So as we are becoming more corporate as well, right? I'm thinking there must be a better way of doing this, right? How do we, as we grow, let's say we grow 200, 300 people, right? Do we not fall into that trap and become that sort of a business, right? So we have to review and revisit, right? So, you know, for all you know, right? Maybe we speak 2, 3 years from now, we may abandon the venture studio model, right? Because we find that, we have new problems with that, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. So I think when we're always open to better and newer ways of doing things. The other thing I'll say is that um, if we are trying to build one big monolithic brand, then putting it all as BUs under a single company makes a lot of sense. But in our case, because we're working with governments and MNC partners and so on, oftentimes the work that we do is fairly white label. The partners that we work with don't necessarily want us to have a very visible presence because that detracts and distracts from the kind of work that we do. Remember, we're working on fairly sensitive issues, right? We're working
Hmm.
on things like national security related stuff. We're working on stuff that has a lot of implications, right? So So you kind of don't want to be seen as too monolithic and too big, right? Because otherwise, then you will fall into the trap of the larger consulting firms, right?
Yeah.
Like, why can they do some kinds of work and they can't do other kinds of work, right? So you end up just becoming like an Accenture or a McKinsey or
Yeah.
TCS, right? And you fall into that trap, right? Where they're too big, and because they're too big, some partners or governments are not entirely willing to engage them because it might send certain signals, right, to the market or to your stakeholders, right? So because of the nature of the work that we're doing, I think it's beneficial for us right now to operate in this sort of slightly under the radar model, right? I mean, it's not like we're invisible. Obviously, people know about us, right? I mean, that's how we get clients, right? But we don't have to be one mega big brand, right? I think there's no need for that, at least at this stage, because I think it's more of a distraction for us at this stage rather than any real advantage.
So in
But
other
again, that
words,
might change over
actually,
time. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, these spin-off companies, they could use their different brand, different
exactly. They
name,
use a
right?
different brand, correct? Yeah.
Oh, I see. And also then for the headquarter, so for you, it's almost like you are doing the holding company. You don't have well, maybe you have some small venture projects still incubating phase that under your headquarter,
Exactly,
right?
yes. So we basically incubate projects, and when they're ready, we split it out. So today, yes, you're right. What I run is more of a holding company that incubates projects that are not mature enough in the cycle to be spun out yet.
Right. So here's the question. What is the criteria? What is the like a tipping point you follow? Say, hey, it's ready for this company to be an independent company. What are some of the indicators you kind of follow?
So, a few, right? So one is customer runway. Do you have a
Mm.
pipeline of customers? That's one. Number two is financial runway, right? Do you have at least 6 months of financial runway, right, to run the
Oh,
business, right? So 6 months is a pretty good indicator normally that you have your stuff together in general. So a 6 month runway and a pipeline of customers for at least 2 years is usually a pretty good indication that the business is solid, right?
mm.
And usually at that point in time, it's quite safe, I would say, right? Quite safe to look at seriously spinning them out.
So typically, actually, does it have to be profitable, break even?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, so yeah, so I think because we are not a venture funded or that sort of a setup, uh, we have a very traditional way of looking at profit and loss and revenue, right? Business that are not profitable will be shut down.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so
Makes
it's a very traditional sort of thinking, I would say. I mean, it sounds very obvious, but these days you have massive loss-making companies on listed on the stock market. So the world's gone crazy, right? but but we tend to belong to the old school of thought where the business is not making money or losing money, right? And you are going on for 3 years losing money. It's time to pull the plug, right? And give it a clean death, right? So we do that all the
okay.
time. I mean, to be honest, for every one company that we actually spin out, we probably have about 3 to 4 failed experiments, right? They didn't
Oh,
quite make it out, right?
oh,
Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff that we've tried hasn't really worked, and sometimes things are ahead of their time, right? So we sometimes revive projects because the market has shifted, something new has changed, and then suddenly now we're back in business again, right? So
actually,
we
Vera, I can tell you, your assets, your knowledge, maybe I will ask the next question, is extremely valuable even for large companies to incubate, many small projects. Then when it's ready to spin out, maybe just these large companies, they have the ability to scale them up, right? And so when these people spin them out, let's say the leaders can basically hire their own people, right? Or they just bring these people along with them, right?
correct, yeah. So they either bring them along or they hire, and usually the way it works is that the senior people who were sort of leading the project will become its new management team,
Yeah, yeah.
and they will get, of course, shares and a stake in the business. And then at a point in time, they have to hire their own, second layer of people and
Oh.
team and so on, right? So there's a bit of that work, and because so we in a way try to centralize a few things. We try to centralize HR because
Mm.
one of the things we always find is that poor hiring practices can hobble a company very early on, right? So we try to
Yeah.
centralize the hiring to make sure that whatever we've learned over 14 years of hiring, right, we continue to keep that knowledge and experience. So we hire the right kind of people, right? We also centralize, I would say, accounting as well, because if you make accounting and tax errors, the blowback is immense. I mean, you get IRS after you. In every country, the tax man is after you. I mean, we are in many countries as well, right? So the tax and all this is something we got to keep and stay totally on top of. So we sort of centralize that finance, admin, and HR sort of functions, because that's sort of it has to be done, but I don't think it's critical to the growth of business. But it's critical in the sense that if you don't do it right, it can really drag your entire company down, right?
Yeah,
And
I
it's
can, I
something, yeah,
can,
yeah.
I can understand the accounting, the administrative support, but when you talk about the HR, does that mean actually that, let's say if I'm the spin-off company CEO, I want to hire this person, but I need to get the approval from the headquarters. Is that correct or not correct?
So it's not so much approval, but rather a sort of a having the processes systems in place for vetting, for ensuring
Hmm.
that the background checks are done properly.
Oh, okay.
And you can't just hire somebody because they're your friend or somebody that you know, right? So I think at this level, right? I mean, yes, hiring friends or people that you know is helpful, but we have also seen, right, if you don't have the vetting process done independently, then you got to be blindsided, right? Because you're not able to see past, the drawbacks of the person. So, you know, I would say the CEOs of the spin-off companies don't necessarily view it as a disadvantage or like, oh my God, I got to get Veera or other management members. Kind of look at it. They sort of see as, I have a brain trust, right,
Oh,
of experienced CEOs, right, who can help me avoid mistakes, right? And
okay.
that's why I said having that culture and that trust and the relationship between the various management teams, right? It's very crucial, right? Because the minute they start seeing as, oh, you're preventing me from doing what I want to do, that's the beginning of the end.
How to incubate sustainability venture business.
You have incubated many projects. Seems to me actually your holding company is almost like an innovation factory. I learned this term from P&G. Your sole job is to create new venture projects, test it. If it's fail, you close it. Any wisdom, any advice on identifying new projects, incubating projects, shutting them down, or making them, spin them out? Any kind of a wisdom to share with us?
So, like I said, the one thing that doesn't change is we try to specialize in the problem space,
Mm,
right? But so we're not wedded to any technology. We're not wedded to any solution. I mean, if you look at technology, right, we started out focusing on digital fabrication, right? And then we moved into looking at IoT, Internet of Things. Then we moved into computer vision and robotics. And then now we are dealing with AI,
mm,
right? So we are not particularly wedded to any technology stack, I would say, right? What we're wedded to is the problem space. So we are quite clear from the get go that we want all our companies working on the numerous associated issues around sustainability, right?
mm.
And this can be anything from climate mitigation, carbon removal stuff, all the way to training, to sustainability reporting, and data collection. It could even be as like doing recycling, e-waste management, or wastewater treatment. It could even be climate adaptation. Protecting against heat stress, wildfires, and flooding. So there is a world of potential issues that need somebody to do something useful to address them, right? Now, the problem is that the timing is not always right. When I mean timing, I mean that the market desire and demand for the solution or for the particular problem to be solved may not be there. The customers, right, or the finance may not be there, right? The funding situation or the investment situation in that space might be very bleak, for example, right? Or you find that the policy or regulatory environment is not ready yet, right? And I think like you look at a few years ago, the idea of sustainability reporting was seen as a voluntary activity, right?
Yeah.
In the last 2 years, we are seeing so many countries mandate sustainability reporting, right? So you have to do it. You have to spend money,
Mm,
get someone to do it for you, right? But when I started, it was a voluntary thing, right? So the regulatory environment had to change in order for us to fully realize the promise of that particular, opportunity. right? So a lot of times you actually have to kind of spot where the timing is right and then strike. But we're always looking at these things, right? We're always looking at sustainability space and we're saying that, oh, something has shifted, something fundamental has shifted in this space right now. Let's quickly go in and get something going over there, right? So for example, one of the things that we currently see today is that people are beginning to have sort of, I would say a loss in faith in the COP or climate mitigation process, right? People are beginning to say, you know what, I think in a world that's becoming more bipolar and no longer multipolar, we are not going to have that great sort of international collaboration to mitigate against carbon emissions. So you're going to see that our 1.5C target is most likely going to fail, right? And so the way we are thinking about it is that, okay, that's a big problem and it's pretty sad it's at that state. But what does that mean? It means that the fact that countries and governments and companies have to adapt to the climate instead. So climate adaptation instead becomes much more important. The relative importance of it goes up, right? And climate adaptation has been criminally underfunded for years. Criminally underfunded, right? Climate adaptation gets 5% of the funding that climate mitigation gets. It's a joke, right? So
could you elaborate the difference between the two? Because for many people may not be 100% clear.
Sure, no problem. Right. So when we look at climate change, there are basically two ways to address it. So climate mitigation is basically you want to remove carbon from the atmosphere by various means and forms in order to reverse climate change. So the idea is reversal. Climate adaptation is basically the understanding that while you are doing all the reversing stuff, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a couple of decades. You're going to need to adapt to the changes that will happen anyway. You're going to adapt to rising sea levels, adapt to higher temperatures, adapt to water stress, adapt to wildfires. California, right? It's, I think, front and center of this, right? So you have to adapt to it. And adaptation means that you need new technologies, new services, new ways of doing insurance, new kinds of housing, all sorts of things. And you have to basically reimagine the entire system, right? On how are we going to survive the changing climate. So the perfect space to be in is you want to be doing activities that both mitigate, meaning you prevent further damage to the environment, and also allow you to adapt. So, for example, a good example, or rather a negative example is air conditioning, right? So it's very hard. So we say, you know what, let's use some air conditioning. But air conditioning is considered a maladaptation because it makes the problem worse, right? Because you actually end up releasing more carbon emissions. But if let's say you move to a air chiller system, right, where you're using some kind of more, passive flow system to make the air cooler and so on, then that's considered a more positive sort of, space between your boat mitigating the climate change and your boat adapting to the hotter environments, right? So there's a whole range of solutions in this space, and where we strive to be in is like we see that there will be naturally much more attention moving towards climate adaptation as people start losing faith with climate mitigation efforts. It's a very natural thing, right? So we want to put ourselves in front of that development, but we can only do that because we're constantly having our eyes in this space, right? And that allows us to see that, you know what, something's changing over here. Let's put ourselves in front of that. Right now, we may be wrong, but then it will be another failed experiment for us.
Social entrepreneurship can be viable business.
There are still misperceptions or even bias toward social entrepreneurship. But I think you are doing a fantastic job in combining or marrying social entrepreneurship with real business. So could you kind of elaborate your journey, your wisdom, and also your advice of, or maybe even lessons of pursuing social entrepreneurship, but still a viable business?
Sure. So the way I'll put it is that a lot of people would typically, preface this question, especially students, right? They will say, oh, how do you balance between impact and revenue, right?
Yeah. That's a very typical mindset.
Yeah, very typical question, right? But I would say you don't, right? The whole idea of social entrepreneurship is predicated on the fact that you can only make revenue because you're generating impact, right? So the way you got to think about it is you got to set up a business system that in the course of doing A, you end up getting B, and because you do B, you get more of A, and so on, right? So the setting up a virtuous loop is what you got to be doing. So social entrepreneurship is about setting up virtuous loops. Now, no one says easy, right? It's obviously difficult, right? It's not a straightforward thing, right? But the goal should be to set up virtuous loops. So let me give you a more example, right? So I'll bring this up, right? So let's take our repair program example, right? So the repair program started out originally from a, very non-profit oriented, like, let's try tackle e-waste. So who's paying for tackling e-waste? No one. No one is paying for tackling e-waste, right? No one's paying for it, right? So let's try to figure out how to tackle e-waste, right? So our point was that, okay, let's look at what our program is to tackle e-waste. And we said, yeah, our program to tackle e-waste is about training people to build their capacity to deliver repair services, so that they can repair their own stuff and all that. And then we said, what is the value creation activity in this whole program? Right? And we identify a few value creation, right? There's a value creation in terms of generating the DIY culture. There's value creation in skills development. There's value creation in the social integration of elderly individuals. There's value creation in of course in helping the waste management ministry, right? The Ministry of Environment in Singapore to basically meet their KPIs and their targets and their goals to reduce the amount of waste in our landfill, right? So we take these value propositions or this value creation and we said, can we get people to pay us for it? Like, can you pay us for that value proposition, right? And of course, eventually you found out, right, that the social engagement, right, of elderly is what gets us paid the best, right? So we kind of zoomed in and doubled down on that and said, you know what, as we do this repair stuff, which is primarily, at least from our standpoint, to tackle the e-waste problem, because it solves another issue which someone's willing to pay for, right? That virtuous loop is what the business is about.
By the way, actually, it's a quick question. For this a repair program which attracts a lot of senior male people, who pays for that? And I'm curious.
Yeah, correct. So it's basically the Ministry of Health.
Oh, the government.
The government, yeah, because they view it, because like say in the social healthcare system, right, they view it as a effort to also a preventive health sort of mechanism. Like, you want to do preventive health, right? And also you must understand that in Singapore there's been the upward trajectory of healthcare spending.
Okay.
Right? So people are living longer, but they're living sick for much longer.
Yeah. Oh.
Right? They're living sick much longer, right? And they found that it's particularly bad healthcare outcomes for male seniors in particular. Right? So, what we do addresses a national need, addresses a national problem, which costs taxpayers real money. Right? What they pay us is a fraction of the amount of money that they would save, right? In the long run, right? So to them, it's like, it's a very obvious sort of value proposition for them. And for us, we get to do what we want to do in the e-waste space, right? But we also get to contribute to what's an important problem, right? And we generate real value and we get paid for it, right? So I think being able to set up that virtuous loop is what being a social entrepreneur is about, right? And like I said, it's not easy, right, to set these things up. But our goal should always be to try and create those virtuous loops.
How do we work on global digital divide challenges?
So now let's talk about your next, the things you are passionate, you are doing, which is the digital divide, because you kind of work with the Intel several programs on the digital divide. I think it's also a fascinating question. Based upon maybe you can briefly explain that program that you are working on with our audience. Then I have several questions. The first question is, based upon your knowledge, what are the biggest gaps in this digital divide? So, first tell us briefly what's that program you're working on relating to the digital divide, and what is the biggest gap in the digital divide?
Sure. So besides Intel, we also work with even Meta on digital divide related programs with several partners actually. Yeah. So at this stage now we work with several partners, but specifically for the Intel program, we help to implement what is called, there's two programs. One of it is called the Intel Digital Readiness Program, and this particular program is targeted at delivering AI skills to what we call non-technical individuals, right? And so there are 5 subcategories in this. The 5 subcategories are your general public, your youth, are your vocational community college students, and are also those who are currently in employment today, right? As well as your public sector leaders. Right? So these are the different audience groups, and the goal is to have them be able to not just understand, but deploy AI in their workflow. Right? So that's the entire goal for that particular program. The second program is called the Intel Skills for Innovation with Intel. And this one is targeted at educators, teachers who are in elementary, middle, and high schools, who are basically trying to, bring technology-based education to the classroom, and they're struggling with it, right? I mean, I think the K-12 system in the US is underfunded. Teachers are under a lot of pressure. There's a lot of problems there, right? And so we're trying to, through that program, chip away at some of those, systemic issues that you have over there. But those are the Intel programs, and the others as well with other organizations. But coming to the digital divide, right? The main problem here, right, is really, the as they always say, right, is the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, right? So
Yeah.
so we have a situation where meritocracy, right, has led to a model, which is meritocracy is good. I mean, fundamentally, right, but led to a model where successive generations are passing on their advantages, and successive generation are also passing on the disadvantages to the subsequent generations, right? So you get one side getting advantages, one get disadvantages, and you get that clearly happening as well. And we know in many societies is that the more divides there are, and digital divide is just one, right? But you also have a socio-economic divide, you have religious divide, you have ethnic divide, and so on. But the more divides there are, the more fractured society becomes, the less able we are to work together to solve problems that affect all of us. And for us, we see that sustainability problems are problems that require all of us to work together, right? And these divides totally don't help at all, right? In that regard. So for us, focusing on sustainability as a core issue, we are always trying to close divides or whatever form. It happens with digital. That's our focus at the moment, right? But there are other kinds of divides as well that if we get the opportunity to, we will aim and attempt to sort of close the gap as well, right? And digital divide typically stems or rather manifests in a few ways, right? It manifests in the context of what they call access. So accessibility or access is one. The second would basically be what they call as exposure, right? So like, do you even know about the digital technologies in the first place? Do you have access to it, right? And then are you, of course, able to acquire it, right? Do you actually have the capital or the resources to acquire and do meaningful things with it, right? So sometimes you find that people have awareness about it because they have social media, they learned about it, whatever, and so on. But they may not have the training, they may not have the skills, be able to make use of it. And even if they have the skills and they've gone to the courses, they may not actually have the money, right, or the access to those equipment or devices and whatever and so on, right? So digital divide typically takes the form of these three ways. Sometimes it's a conflation of multiple issues, or sometimes just one of these issues. But generally, that's how the space is viewed. And the problem is that digital divide in the past used to be really about making sure people have access to electricity, have access to devices, have access to internet. But we haven't even solved that problem. And today, now we have access to AI and all these other things coming up, right? So the problem is deepening, but more of the fundamental issues have not even been addressed in many places, right? So
Right.
you kind of need people working at different levels of it. Some working at a very early stage. So if you look at very remote communities, if you look at some of the very very poor Pacific Island nations or countries in Africa, especially in Central Africa, for example, right? They have more fundamental issues like internet access, electricity access, and so on, right? Let's not even talk about AI, right, for that matter. And if you
I
look at
see.
like middle income countries, right? If you look at South Africa, but India, for example, or Malaysia, and even Indonesia, and so on, these countries have access in terms of internet, their power and all that stuff, and devices even. But what they don't have is basically these skills, right? To be able to effectively profit from the digital economy, right? So you have that access, the economic opportunity that they don't get access to. So it's a complex problem, and I think the way you see this problem is that it's a very local problem as well. Like even the US, right? Depending on which state you're in, right? The way you would think about digital divide can be quite different, right? Whether you're in an inner city or you're in a rural environment, or whether you're in Wyoming, right? I think depending on how the state government funds education and funds technology skilling, digital divides even exist within the US itself, for that matter.
Opportunities to apply AI in education space.
You are doing a lot of education trainings, even for an Intel program, involved in the K to 12, into professional development, basically bringing in the AI to the classroom to help the educators. So, what do you think are the opportunities for AI to influence or change the education space?
So I mean, as this video is being taken, I'm actually at the ASU GSV conference, right, which is
Oh,
a major edtech conference, right, which is why it brought me to San Diego, right. But I think it's quite interesting, right. So what we are seeing, at least the way I see education being impacted from the kind of companies that are over here, is in a few places, right. So first is that the education sector in general has a few fundamental problems. So if you look at K-12, we know about the fact there is a funding problem in K-12. We know there is, and the funding problem also leads to a whole host of other problems around behavioral issues among youth. So you have much more mental health challenges among the youth. You have much more mental challenges among teachers, right? And a lot of teachers are leaving the system. They're not willing to stay on and be abused by the education system, right? They're leaving in droves. And you also have basically um, a lot of politicization, a lot of politicization of the education system, right? A lot of bring up politics inside this. I mean, schools are not meant to be, at least not K-12, right? It's not meant to be a platform of politics, right? But that is the way that is like that, right? And if you look at basically education at the higher level, right? What we're seeing over here is that you have basically education systems that are, attempting to compete for students, given that the student debt problem is out of control, right? They want to really give great value propositions to their students, so that coming to university doesn't put them further in debt, but puts them on a pathway out of debt instead, right? And that's become very, very central. So many universities are looking at how do I connect my university education to career prospects and economic prospects for my students, right? And the reason I'm laying out these problems is because we'll talk in a moment about how AI can sort of support each of these things, right? But the third space basically is what we call the workplace to workforce training, right? That the idea that learning no longer stops at when you graduate, right? So in fact, many universities, and I'm sure UCSF is also offering, um, continuing education, right,
yeah.
for adult learners. And in fact, many universities are seeing that the bulk of their learners might potentially be coming from this group rather than from undergraduates instead, right? And so in that regard, what we are seeing is all these developments. Now, what AI can do is that AI can basically support the workflows and processes that institutions are already using to tackle these issues. So, for example, the K-12 level, can we save teachers time in doing instructional design, right? Can we support students' mental health by basically offering differentiated learning and also offering counseling in a more individualized, personalized chatbot manner and so on. In the higher ed space, you're seeing that can we offer career guidance and career support throughout the journey of the entire student, and can we even help them choose courses, right, or modules that they should study, right, based on their preferences, based on market needs, and based on economic opportunities. Can we try and offer internships at scale, right, to a large range of students, right? So things like this AI is trying to do, and we're seeing many startups and companies offering solutions like this. And at the workplace and workforce space, right, is basically can I uh, how do we sort of help them use AI in helping their workflows again, right? So workflows, let's say you are in accounting or finance, or you're doing writing a lot of reports, any kind of white collar data oriented work can benefit from AI, right? Any sort of
Yeah.
that work, right?
Yeah,
And I'm sure even you and I already use that today, right? So that type of work will probably only expand, right? So I think that's the kind of role AI has to play in this space.
Thank you for watching.